Hello and welcome back to the Winning Agenda's Hero Spotlight series. My name's Jesse Marshall and I'm here with one of my favourite heroes in Flesh and Blood actually, Prism, Sculptor of Arc Light, the first Illusionist hero, a light Illusionist hero, and one that's got added some really interesting different ways to play the game. Had a really big impact on the classic constructed metagame and certainly on limited formats as well in Monarch. And just all around has lots of different directions you can take it. So what we're going to explore today is what does Prism do, what are the core mechanics, what are the key cards, and what are the different ways that you can build a Prism deck and play a Prism deck or play against a Prism deck to maximize your chance of success. And I will say from the outset that I think Prism is one of the most skill testing heroes, not skill testing heroes necessarily overall, but if you're a new player and you come up against Prism and you don't know what's going on, you'll get stomped harder than against most other heroes. Like if you just try and play the core mechanics of regular Flesh and Blood that you learn from, cracking a box of Welcome to Wraith and playing it with your friends, without knowing what Prism can potentially do and what the key cards are, you're going to really struggle to win. So hopefully what I'll give you today is an idea about Prism's key mechanics, the key cards, and how you can play with and against them. So the key card, obviously, to start with is Prism herself. So her hero ability is once per turn instant, 2 resources, banish a card from Prism's soul, create a Spectral Shield token. So there are 2 keywords on this hero ability. The first one is Prism's soul, and the second one is the Spectral Shield token that it creates. So what is a Spectral Shield? It is an aura, as it says on the card here. It's an Illusionist aura with if your hero would be dealt damage, instead destroy Spectral Shield and prevent 1 damage that source would deal. So what this effectively means is that it's an aura, so it stays in play until it's destroyed, and it's not destroyed until you would take damage, and the Spectral Shield prevents that damage. So if you have multiple Spectral Shields in play and you would take 1 damage, then one of the shields gets destroyed, and the rest of them stay in play. And what this means is that alongside Prism's ability, the other Illusionist cards and Light Illusionist cards that allow you to create Spectral Shields can build you up this kind of battery of Spectral Shields, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, until you've got a whole lot of them in play. And then alongside your usual ability to block with your hand, you're generating this kind of board presence of additional shields. And as we'll see in a moment, your shields don't only prevent damage, but they also play other roles in your deck and in allowing you to build up a board presence and an advantage on the board. And that's not something that many heroes in Flesh and Blood can do. So obviously Mechanologist, which is a class I haven't done a video for yet for Dash, but Dash can build up items on the board which stay in play, and they can create kind of a long game advantage in a board state. But most Flesh and Blood heroes, your board state diminishes as the game goes on. You start with your equipment in play, and then over the course of the game, you block with your equipment or you use it and it goes away, and you actually end up with less on the board than you started with. Whereas with Prism, not only through Spectral Shields, but through other auras, you're looking to build up a board state. The other keyword on Prism's card is Prism's Soul. And what that is basically just a zone underneath your hero card, and you'll see a range of Light Illusionist cards that allow you to put cards into your soul. And if a card's put into your soul, usually it goes there instead of going to your graveyard or to the banish zone. And then Prism's ability allows you to pay 2 resources as an instant, once per turn, so you can do it once on your turn and once on your opponent's turn. Banish a card from your soul that's been put there, so put it from your soul to your banish zone and create a Spectral Shield. So when I said your Spectral Shields can be put to different uses, both of Prism's weapons, Luminaris and Iris of Reality, both allow you to use your Spectral Shields as aggressive options, or to use them as weapons if you like. So Luminaris says, during your action phase, Illusionist auras you control are weapons with 1 strength and once per turn action, 0 resources attack. So what this means is that on your turn, all of your Spectral Shields are actually weapons that you can attack with for 0 resources. They don't have go again though, unless the second part of Luminaris is active, and that says, while there is a card with a yellow color strip in your pitch zone, Illusionist attacks you control have go again. So because your Spectral Shields are Illusionist auras, they're weapons and they gain go again from Luminaris, so they become 1 strength weapons with 0 resources attack. So you can attack for free, And as long as there's a card with a yellow color strip in your pitch zone, so that's a yellow card that pitches for 2, all of your Spectral Shields and all your other Illusionist attacks have go again. So you can obviously see a lot of power there in Luminaris, because it means that as you're building up more and more Spectral Shields on the board, as the Prism player, all you need to do is pitch any yellow card, and you can attack individually with every single one of your Spectral Shields in sequence. And obviously that's once you've got sort of 5 or 6 on the board, it's extremely difficult for your opponent to block those, because they need to block them individually. Obviously they could do it with equipment once or twice, but then once their equipment's all used up, they have to start using cards out of their 4-card hand. And obviously that's really inefficient to block 1 power attacks with your cards from hand usually. So they'll generally tend to try and take the damage from their Spectral Shields and then hit you back to try and get rid of them. But if you've got good enough defensive cards or other ways to misdirect them and stop them from hitting your Spectral Shields, you can just keep building up your board presence over time. Iris of Reality allows you to have a more controlled game plan, I guess, a more focused game plan, and perhaps one that has a higher floor but a far lower ceiling. So Luminaris, because you give your whole team go again, so every one of your Spectral Shields and every one of your Illusionist attacks, the ceiling's almost limitless. You can just keep going and going and going depending on how many Spectral Shields you have. Whereas with Iris of Reality, all your Illusionist auras, instead of being 1 strength weapons that cost 0 to attack with, they become 4 strength weapons that cost 3 to attack with, but they intrinsically have go again. Unlike Luminaris, Iris of Reality doesn't give your other Illusionist attacks go again. It only gives your auras go again. And obviously it costs 3 resources to attack with each one. So although your first Spectral Shield is a lot more powerful, the remainder of them get harder and harder to use because you have to have cards in hand to pay for them. So in general, you'll see Luminaris builds being the sort of dominant competitive build for that reason, because you can punish your opponent more by building up a larger board state and play to that higher ceiling. So I mentioned that there are a few other cards that work with and interact with Spectral Shields and create them. Prismatic Shield, particularly the red version, is probably the core card in that vein. It costs 3, it's an instant, it doesn't block, crucially, so there is a cost to including cards like this in your deck, in that they can't block. But it says create 3 Spectral Shield tokens, and you can do this on your opponent's turn. You can do it in response to their attack to basically allow it to block for 3, but at that point it's basically a 2-card block for 3, which is pretty bad. Like, it's a 3-cost defense reaction that defends for 3. Obviously, Spectral Shields have other utility in that they can prevent arcane damage, they can prevent any non-combat damage that's coming at you, but usually you want to use your Prismatic Shield card to create Spectral Shields that you're then going to attack with on your next turn and build up that board presence and get that additional offensive value out of them as well. Glisten is another instant. Again, it doesn't block, so there is a cost to including cards like this in your deck. It says 2 resources, instant, distribute up to 4 +1 strength counters among any number of weapons you control. So remembering that all your Spectral Shields are weapons, so you can put these +1 counters on. If you've got 1 Spectral Shield, you can put all 4 on that one. And if you've got multiple of them, you can spread them across the multiple Spectral Shields in whatever fashion you like. It says at the beginning of your end phase, you remove all +1 counters from weapons you control. But crucially, this bracketed text says if a permanent is no longer a weapon during your end phase, the +1 counters are not removed. And because Luminaris and Iris of Reality say that the Spectral Shields and all Illusionist auras you control are weapons during your action phase, by the time your end phase comes around, they're no longer weapons, so the counters don't get removed. So Glisten onto Spectral Shield, putting all the counters onto your shields, is one way that you can get some ongoing value. And also you get to choose which ones of your shields die. So if you have 6 shields in play, you put all your counters on 1 shield, or 4, and then your opponent deals 5 damage to you. You can choose to kill the other 5 shields and keep the one that's got 5 attack strength on your turn. So Glisten and Prismatic Shield are 2 cards that interact with this kind of Spectral Shield side of the Prism game plan. But what we're going to look at next is a couple of the other really key elements of how Prism interacts with the opponent and interacts with the game. So the first is Heralds, and you'll see if you look at the Prism card pool from the Monarch set, the Light Illusionist card pool, that there are a range of these Herald attacks, and they all look quite similar at first blush, but they have some similarities and some really key differences between them, and some sort of different mechanics that allow you to sort of tinker with and tailor your deck to meet your specific needs and your specific game plan. Herald of Protection is probably universally the most powerful, certainly of the common heralds. At red, it's a 2-cost 7 power attack, blocks for 3, which is already above the usual rate. So normally when you're paying 2 resources, you'd expect to get maybe a 6 power attack. So instead you're paying 2 to get a 7 power attack. If Herald of Protection hits, put it into your hero's soul and create a Spectral Shield token. So that's a very powerful on-hit trigger. Not only do you get to put it into your soul, which means you can use Prism's ability later to turn it into a Spectral Shield, and you turn on all the other cards in your deck that ask you to have put a card into your soul this turn, which we'll see in a minute. But you also get to immediately create a Spectral Shield with this. And what that means is if you've pitched a yellow to play the Herald of Protection, you attack, it hits, you create a Spectral Shield. If you've got Luminaris as your weapon, the Spectral Shield the Luminaris allows you to then immediately attack with that Spectral Shield, because the yellow card in your pitch zone gave your Herald go again, the Herald hit, you've then got this Spectral Shield in play, you can attack with the Spectral Shield. So at a minimum, this on-hit trigger, as long as you're pitching yellows, which you're usually going to be doing in this type of deck, at a minimum, the on-hit trigger reads, add an extra damage and then prevent a damage at some point in the future. So it's a really powerful little piece of value that you can get out of this card. The key word at the bottom, Phantasm, is a really important part of both playing with Prism and playing against Prism. So it says, if Herald of Protection is defended by a non-illusionist attack with 6 or more strength, destroy Herald of Protection and close the combat chain. And what this means, and we'll see this a few times with Prism cards that get destroyed and close the combat chain, is that Go Again does not resolve. So what Go Again means is it says, as this card resolves, you gain an action point back. But because abilities like Phantasm and Spectra, which we'll come to later, immediately close the combat chain, the cards that are on the combat chain don't resolve. And that means that Go Again does not resolve, and it doesn't give you an action point back. So if you pitch that yellow to attack with Herald of Protection, and they block with a 6 or more power attack on their side, so if they block with a Command and Conquer, even though the Command and Conquer only blocks for 3, the fact that it's a 6 or more power attack means that the Phantasm ability on your Herald of Protection triggers, your Herald of Protection gets destroyed, your combat chain gets closed immediately, and you don't get the Go Again action point because the combat chain has closed and your Herald of Protection hasn't resolved. So when you're playing with Prism, you need to be really careful about this drawback, this Phantasm drawback. If you're playing against a deck that has a lot of 6 power attacks in it, or 6 or more power attacks, then you can pretty much bank on your Heralds getting popped or destroyed by their Phantasm ability a lot of the time. And you've just got to structure your turn and the way you order your plays around that. But so as we go through all the Heralds, you'll see that all of them have this Phantasm ability. Some of them, like Herald of Triumph, allow you to mitigate the Phantasm drawback a little bit, because it says attack action cards have -1 strength while defending Herald of Triumph, which means that they need to block with a 7 power or more attack in order to trigger the Phantasm on Herald of Triumph. Because if they block with a 6, then the 6 power attack becomes a 5 power attack from Herald of Triumph's static ability, and the Phantasm doesn't trigger. Herald of Triumph, like Herald of Protection, says if it hits, you put it into your soul. And again, it's a 2 resource for 7, so it's slightly above rate in terms of the attack, plus you get this on-hit trigger, but you've got this Phantasm drawback. Herald of Rebirth is another example. If it hits, it goes in your soul. Again, a 2 for 7. And the additional ability you get is to put 1 card with Phantasm from your graveyard on top of your deck, which means you can basically recycle your best Herald, or the Herald that's best for your game situation at the moment, if the Herald of Rebirth hits. Herald of Erudition is a very powerful, majestic. It's a 2 for 5, but it is yellow, remembering, so it's slightly less powerful on the cost to power ratio than these other Heralds I've shown you so far, but it's got really powerful abilities. So it says it's got Dominate, which makes it obviously more difficult for your opponent to block, and it says if Herald of Erudition hits, put it in your Hero Soul and draw 2 cards, which, when we've already seen Luminaris and the fact that it can give all your attacks on the turn go again, as long as you've got one yellow card in your pitch zone. If you pitch a yellow to play Herald of Erudition, then you're threatening the 5-power attack from this, plus 2 additional cards you're going to draw, plus whatever else you've got in your hand, and it's all going to have go again. So if they don't block out the Herald of Erudition, you can have a really, really big turn. Wartune Herald is a slightly more efficient card than the other Heralds in terms of it's a 1 for 7, so really great rate in terms of resource to cost. It's still got the Phantasm drawback, and it's just got the vanilla, basically, if it hits, goes in your soul. No additional bonus. But Wartune Herald, very powerful card, just because the base stats on it and the vanilla stats on it are just so, so good. And you still get that on-hit trigger of going into the soul. So other than the Heralds, I've mentioned a couple of times that firstly, losing your action point and your go again off your Luminaris when your Herald gets popped is really bad. So this foot or legs equipment that we've got here, Phantasmal Footsteps, helps to mitigate that somewhat. It says, the first time an Illusionist attack action card you control is destroyed each turn, so basically the first time Phantasm triggers each turn, you may pay 1 resource. If you do, gain 1 action point. So that's really important. It means that if you pitch a yellow to play a 2-cost Herald, you can then pitch something else and pay 1 more resource if it gets popped to get your action point back and continue your turn. So you have this kind of get out of jail free ability, or get out of jail for 1 resource, to keep continuing your turn if your Phantasms get popped. So very important to have Phantasmal Footsteps in any deck that's trying to sling some Heralds at the opponent, but also, crucially, Phantasmal Footsteps has this fantastic ability to defend. So even though it's got 0 defense naturally, it says whenever you defend with Phantasmal Footsteps, you may pay 1 resource. If you do, its defense becomes 1 until end of turn. And this is really great against decks that are looking to throw multiple attacks at you, and they're constantly breaking the combat chain. Because if you pay 1 resource, say you're playing against Dash, they attack you with the pistol, you block with this, pay 1 resource, you've blocked 1 of the 2 damage from the pistol, then they're going to break the combat chain to reload their pistol, and then you get to defend again with your Phantasmal Footsteps. And because its defense becomes 1 until end of turn, each time you defend with it on the turn, you don't have to pay again, but you're blocking 1 damage. It does have this drawback that says if it defends a non-illusionist attack with 6 or more strength, destroy it when the combat chain closes. So sometimes they'll have combat tricks to pump their attacks, like Razor Reflex as an attack reaction or whatever else, and you need to be careful that you're not endangering your Phantasmal Footsteps by blocking something where they could have a trick, or where it's just a big attack naturally. So you can only use your Footsteps really to safely block smaller attacks, but it's still a powerful piece of equipment. Vestige of Soul is another really important piece of equipment for a lot of these Prism builds, because it says, if a card has been put into your hero's soul this turn, whenever you pitch a light card, you instead get that many resources plus 1. So if you attack with a Herald, say you pitch a yellow attack with a Herald that has go again, the Herald hits, it goes in your soul. Once that card has gone in your soul, every card you pitch for the rest of your turn is going to give you an extra resource. So blues will pitch for 4, yellows will pitch for 3. And this key bonus of having blues pitch for 4 particularly allows you to play a lot of the 4-cost cards that we'll see later off 1 pitch card. And they're specifically designed and balanced so that they're a little bit more powerful. Because they cost 4, that's more than 1 card's worth of pitch to play them, so they're a little bit more powerful. And if you can unlock this ability with Vestige of Soul to play your 4-cost auras and your other 4-cost cards like Tome of Divinity, which we'll come to in a minute, off 1 blue pitch, then they become extremely, extremely powerful. So Vestige of Soul can lead to some really big blowout turns as well. So these aforementioned auras, which cost 4 or more. Genesis is probably the archetypal aura. It's a majestic, it costs 4, it's a yellow, and you'll notice that a lot of these majestics in Prism are yellow, because remember, majestics only come in 1 color, and Prism's obviously got this theme around Luminaris of rewarding you for yellow cards, and so yeah, you'll see a lot of the majestics will be yellow. So Genesis is a yellow that costs 4. It's got Spectra, which I'll come back to the ability of the card in a sec, but I'll describe Spectra first because there's a range of these Spectra auras. So Spectra's a bit confusing. It says, Genesis can be attacked. When Genesis becomes the target of an attack, destroy it and close the combat chain. The attack does not resolve. So it's also, the card type is Light Illusionist Instant Aura. So you don't have to spend an action point to play Genesis. You can play it on your turn or on your opponent's turn. Costs you 4 resources to play, so it's quite expensive. And the only way your opponent can get rid of it, so it's going to stay on the board forever because it's an aura, until your opponent attacks it. And when they attack it, when it becomes the target of the attack, you immediately destroy Genesis. You can't block the attack, you can't save the Genesis, it just gets destroyed, but their attack doesn't resolve. So crucially, that means just like with Phantasm, when your Phantasm triggers and your attack gets destroyed and the combat chain closes, when they try and attack your Spectra auras, the attacks don't resolve and the go again doesn't trigger. So even if they, play an Enlightened Strike, try and kill your Genesis, give it go again, it won't get go again because the attack won't resolve, so the go again won't trigger. So that'll end that action point, and they won't get the action point back. So the only way they can get around that is by having multiple action points from things like Scab Skin Leathers or Time Snap Potion, and spending one of the action points to attack the Genesis. Genesis's actual ability is very powerful. So it says, at the start of your turn, you may put a card from your hand into your hero's soul. If it's an Illusionist card, create a Spectral Shield token. If it's a Light card, draw a card. If it's both, if it's a Light Illusionist card, you get to draw a card and create a Spectral Shield token. So what this allows you to do is cycle, at the beginning of your turn, any Light Illusionist card in your hand. You cycle it, you put it into your soul, you get a free Spectral Shield, and you replace the card with a draw. So what have you netted out of this trade? You've netted a card in soul, you've netted turning on your Vestige of Soul, and other things which say if a card has been put into your hero's soul this turn, you get X bonus, and you get a Spectral Shield. And that's a pretty good deal. If you're doing that every turn, and if your opponent allows Genesis to stay in play, you're going to quickly overwhelm them by getting a free Spectral Shield, a free card in soul, and more resources from your Vestige of Soul every turn. Merciful Retribution, similarly, gives you an ongoing incremental advantage that gets stronger the more your board develops. And the more your opponent ignores this and lets your board develop, the more it will do to them, the more negative things it will do to them. So again, it costs 4, which means that if your Vestige of Soul is active, you can pitch 1 blue and play this Merciful Retribution, which is really powerful. So whenever an aura or attack action card you control is destroyed, deal 1 arcane damage to target hero. If it's a non-token light card, put it into your hero's soul. So all your Spectral Shields, when they're destroyed, will deal 1 arcane damage to target hero. So that's really good. It turns your Spectral Shields into little bombs that not only do they prevent a damage, and not only do they attack for 1 on your turn if you're playing Luminaris, but they also, when they're destroyed, deal an arcane damage to your opponent. If the card that's destroyed, so it's aura or attack action card. So that obviously also works with heralds. So whenever a herald is destroyed by the Phantasm ability, it also deals an arcane damage to target hero. Also, if it's a non-token light card, so if it's a herald or if it's another aura with Spectra, a Genesis, or another Merciful Retribution that gets destroyed, or even the Merciful Retribution itself, it gets put into your hero's soul, which means, again, you get to turn on all of your Tome of Divinity, your Vestige of Soul, things that care about whether a card's been put into your soul this turn, but you also get something into your soul that you can use to create a Spectral Shield later. So Merciful Retribution fulfills a few roles. It is a good finisher. Once you've got a big Spectral Shield presence, your opponent gets put in this position where they can't attack you because your Spectral Shields will kill them with arcane damage, and they have to kind of spend their turn attacking your Merciful Retribution to get rid of it. It then goes in your soul, turns on your Vestige of Soul, and then perhaps you can pitch blues to play more auras and overwhelm them. So Merciful Retribution is a really good one. Light Sentinel, similarly, is a very powerful misdirector. So when I was talking before about keeping your Spectral Shields alive by misdirecting your opponent, you can see that Genesis, Merciful Retribution present strong onboard threats that most opponents need to spend their entire turn, or at least a whole action point, getting rid of. Light Sentinel is another in that line. It doesn't present an onboard threat as such, but it's a magnet. They have to attack it with their next attack. So it costs 6. It's a little bit more expensive than the other Spectra auras. But it says, if Light Sentinel is in the arena when an opponent announces an attack, they must choose Light Sentinel as the target of the attack. So they have to attack this with their next attack, and it has Spectra, which means that as soon as they do attack it, it gets destroyed, the combat chain closes, and they don't get go again. So unless they've got multiple action points from Time Snap Potion or Scabskin Leathers or something else, then their turn's going to be over. Now this does cost 6, so you might say, well, if I'm having to pitch 2 blues regularly, so 2 blues and this card itself, I'm spending 3 cards to maybe take up their turn. Yeah, maybe that's a good trade. Maybe that's good enough. Maybe I can use the last extra card I have to, pitch to Prism to make a Spectral Shield and then hit them back for a couple on my turn, but it doesn't feel amazing. And yeah, Arclight Sentinel sometimes is not going to be incredible, but against some opponents, like particularly when Chain was very big in the meta, being able to shut down their turn and strand them with cards, blood debt cards against Leviah, being able to potentially strand them, or at least just make them waste their entire turn can be quite strong. But obviously when I say against Leviah is probably the worst matchup for Prism. It's the one that like dumpsters you the hardest because they do have Scabskin Leathers, and they've got pretty much every attack in their deck's going to be 6 or more power. So they deal really well with your Spectres, and they deal really well with your Heralds. But yeah, anyway, Arclight Sentinel good against Chain is kind of the main point I was trying to get across there. Parable of Humility, probably the weaker of the Spectra auras. It says attack action cards controlled by an opposing hero have -1 strength while attacking and defending, which means that their attacks are a little bit less potent on the offense, but they're also a little bit hard. It's a little bit harder for them to trigger your Phantasm on your Heralds because their attacks aren't as strong while they're defending either. It doesn't have as much offensive punch as the others, so sometimes is the one that gets left out. And then you've got Ode to Wrath, which is kind of a middle ground. So it says whenever a source you control deals damage to an opposing hero, they lose 1 life. So that means that every one of your Spectral Shields basically attacks for 2. So it's pretty strong on the offensive side. And it says Illusionist attack action cards you control have go again, which means that even if you don't have a yellow in your pitch zone, all your attack action cards have go again. But if you don't have a yellow in your pitch zone, crucially, your auras don't have go again. So your weapons, so your Spectral Shields won't have go again. But Ode to Wrath, certainly the ability to make your Spectral Shields attack for 2 is pretty powerful. And then we've got Tome of Divinity, which I mentioned before, as a great companion, just like Vestige of Soul, which says you get an extra resource if a card's been put in your soul this turn. Tome of Divinity says draw 2 cards. It's a 4-cost instant. But it says if a card has been put into your hero's soul this turn, instead draw 3 cards. And if you think about it regularly, say you have to pitch a blue and then 1 of 3 resources from another blue. So, you spent 1 1/3 cards paying for this. And then the card itself, if you think about it like that, it draws 2 cards. You basically spent 2 1/3 cards to draw 2 cards. That's really bad. But once Vestige of Soul is active, if you pitch a blue, the blue pitches for 4, which pays for the entire cost of this, and it draws 3 cards. So you spent the blue and this to draw 3 cards, which is a lot better. So you actually up a card. So you go from being like down 1/3 of a card to up an entire card, which is a really big difference. So if you can be regularly triggering your Vestige of Soul with your deck, then including Tome of Divinity can be a really great way to extend your turns and just get up a card. Because we know that it's really quite difficult to actually get card advantage in Flesh and Blood. The cards that replace themselves are one thing, and there's quite a few of those, but there are not many, divination cards if you come from Magic. You spend 1 card and you draw 2 cards. Tome of Divinity is one of the few that can allow you to turn 2 cards into 3 if you combine it with an active Vestige of Soul. So the other thing about Prism, I guess, is that you've got these really powerful Heralds that are great attacks. They've got really good rate. They've got strong on-hit abilities, and they can, threaten a sort of aggressive game plan. Then you've got these auras that can build you up, like Genesis, a really strong board presence in combination with Spectral Shields. You've got the Spectral Shields themselves and Prism's hero ability that not only give you ongoing defensive value, but also allow you to attack with your Luminaris. Not only do you get your Heralds that you can afford to pay for on your turn and that you have in hand, but you also get any Spectral Shields that are left on the board, also pinion for 1. So you've got a range of different elements to your game plan. But what I'm looking at here is Soul Shield, which is a light defense reaction. It's a 2 for 6 defense reaction, so most of the time, pardon me, you're going to be spending 2 cards to block for 6, so that's fine. But crucially, it gets put in your hero's soul when the combat chain closes. So this is a great way to, in a game where you're kind of on the back foot a bit, and you're not able to consistently land heralds to get your Vestige of Soul online, this is a way on their turn that you can turn on your Vestige of Soul, because when the combat chain closes, Soul Shield goes into your soul. Then your Vestige of Soul is online, which means that if you then have a blue left in your hand and a 4-cost aura, you can pitch the blue, play the 4-cost aura at the end of their turn, and perhaps try and pivot based on that. Or you can pitch a blue, play a Tome of Divinity, and draw 3 cards and maybe have a bigger turn on your turn. So Soul Shield can play a really big role there, but it's also just generally a good way to deal with Dominate and other sort of offensive threats and present a bit more of a tanky look. You can also obviously play all the generic defense reactions, and they can be really strong in Prism, where you want to have a bit more of a mid-range and a bit less of an aggressive game plan, or even try and go for a really full control build. Then these 0 for 4 defense reactions are really worth considering and playing around with until you find the balance that you like between all-out aggression with heralds and having some more defensive options as well. So I've mentioned that there are a few variant ways that you can build Prism. Great Library of Solana I haven't highlighted as a card, but obviously it's really powerful in any of these strategies that are looking to do a lot with yellow cards. Because Great Library of Solana says at the beginning of each end phase, if a hero has 2 or more cards with yellow color strips in their pitch zone, they gain +1 intellect until end of turn. And then any player, as an action, can discard 2 cards with yellow color strips to destroy Great Library of Solana. Go again. So Library is really interesting because you can't pitch it, you can't block with it, so the only way you can get out of your hand is to play it. You generally want to play it on a turn where you can immediately get value from it. So a turn where you've pitched 2 yellows to like play a Herald and then play it, or do something else, make a Spectral Shield with Prism's ability and then play the Great Library. So then you drop to 5 immediately end of your turn. And it can be really, really strong to get this early in the game, particularly against a hero that can't easily use yellows to kill it. There are a lot of decks that don't play a lot of yellows and just simply won't be able to kill your library. And if you can then consistently retain enough tempo that you're pitching 2 yellows on every one of your turns, you can get a pretty insurmountable card advantage out of Great Library. And it can allow you to overcome the mathematical limits that are placed on your auras in particular. Things like Merciful Retribution, Ode to Wrath, and these other 4-cost auras. If you can be consistently playing out 2 Spectras every turn and perhaps blocking, or some other attack, then you can quickly overwhelm your opponent's ability to deal with your board. So Library can be a really key part in that kind of build. But in general, there is definitely a build around Spectra and trying to develop a board presence and have Heralds coming in at the same time so that your opponent, and Spectral Shields, so your opponent has to spend their entire turn dealing with the Spectra aura, and then you've got Spectral Shields coming in as well and potentially a Herald on the side. And just try and get value each turn cycle out of that. You've then got sort of the Herald pummel builds, so you're just looking to use things like Herald of Protection, which I've got there, and Herald of Erudition, the one with Dominate that lets you draw 2 cards if it hits, and then having attack reactions like Pummel that punish your opponent for blocking exactly, not only give you your powerful on-hit triggers from your Herald of Erudition and your Herald of Protection, but also punish your opponent by forcing them to discard cards. You've then got builds that lead more heavily into the Prismatic Shield side of things and the Spectral Shield side of things, trying to use Glisten, trying to use this the ability to attack with more powerful Spectral Shield attacks. And then we've got things, this is sort of a package that you can bring into any one of the other builds. You can play it with a more Herald focused build, you can play it with a more Spectra focused build, but the package of, I guess, card advantage of using Tome of Divinity combined with your Vestige of Soul to have those really big blowout turns where you're as I said, getting that +1 card advantage, which is so hard to find in FaB, and using things like Tome of Findle, which works best with the Spectra auras because they don't require an action point to play. Tome of Findle, as we know, is one of these rare cards in FaB that does give you that +1 card advantage a lot of the time. Or at least plus a part of a card, because it does cost 1 resource to play. But you can actually utilize, you're not as held back by its drawback. So Tome of Findle's drawback is it's an action without go again, so it ostensibly takes up your entire turn. But if you've got if the cards you're drawing are able to be played without an action point because they're auras like Merciful Retribution and Ode to Wrath that are instants, or they're just instants like Prismatic Shield, then the drawback of Tome of Findle isn't such an issue. So those are kind of some of the variants and the different packages within the Prism card pool that you can pick and choose from to design a deck that you feel suits your playstyle. In terms of sideboard, there are a range of other cards that are worth considering. Things like Phantasmaclasm, which is just a really powerful, pitch for 3 and you get a 9 power attack. Wow, that's pretty strong. You get to also look at their hand and get rid of one of their 6 power attacks so they can't pop the Phantasm so easily. They do get to replace the card with something unknown. So sometimes you can, if they don't have any 6 power attacks, you can actually draw them into one. That's one of the downsides of Phantasmaclasm. But in general, it's just a really efficient attack that presents a pretty good threat. And if you don't expect that your opponent's going to have many 6 or more power attacks in their deck just because of their hero, then it can be worth just sideboarding in Phantasmaclasm for a bit more punch. Command and Conquer is always good to have. It's good against opposing prisms because it pops phantasms. But it's just obviously really powerful against a lot of decks that are trying to set up 5-card hands. Herald of Judgment is a kind of sideboard special. It's specifically there to shut down opponents that want to play cards from their banish zone. So it was very good against Chain, stopped them for a turn from playing out of their banish zone. But it can be similarly good against other decks that sometimes play out of the banish zone. Kano, there are a few others, but Chain was certainly the main target of Herald of Judgment. Celestial Cataclysm is really powerful, and a lot of Prism decks will be kind of main decking this rather than sideboarding it, because it's just a really good, efficient outlet for the cards in Soul that you build up over the game. It just gives you another option rather than just creating Spectral Shields. You've actually got this other outlet for them. You can have a really powerful attack once or twice in the mid to late game where you pay 0 resources, you get a 7 go again, and all you have to do is banish 3 cards from your Soul. It's also really good in the mirror because it pops all of your opposing Prism's auras, phantasms, because it's not an Illusionist attack. It's a light attack only. And it's got 7 power as well, which means even their Herald of Triumphs won't be immune to being popped by Celestial Cataclysm. And then you've got Great Library of Solana, which, as I mentioned, is a good sideboard card. It can be quite core to some strategies, so they will kind of play it regardless. Sometimes, I've played Prism decks where I'll even play this in the Prism mirror. I don't even care that sometimes I'm going to give them the advantage because I'm so confident that it's going to be better for me because I'm just playing so many yellows. But in general, you'll want to bring the Great Library in where you expect your opponent not to be able to destroy it easily and also not to get many 5-card hands out of it, and where you think you're going to have the tempo capability to actually play it and make use of its ability. Sometimes if you feel like you're going to be more on your back foot, playing more defense reactions and sideboarding all of those in, then sometimes Great Library might not be as good for you. So equipment, we've already discussed Vestige of Soul, we've discussed Phantasmal Footsteps. Dreamweavers and Halo are just a couple of useful pieces. So Dreamweavers is a gloves that basically you have to use it before you attack, but it stops a Phantasm attack from being able to be popped. So there can just be like a key moment where you're like, I've got a Herald of Erudition. I know that they have no equipment left to block with. They're not going to be able to stop this. I just need to make sure it doesn't get popped and the Phantasm doesn't get triggered. So you can use your Dreamweavers on that attack. You just destroy them and the next attack you play loses Phantasm. Halo of Illumination can be a really good way early in the game to get a card into your Soul at a very cheap cost of 1 resource. Replaces itself if it's a light card, the card that you put in your Soul, and then you've turned on your Vestige of Soul, which means that you can, go off with a Tome of Divinity turn or something like that. So it's just a nice piece of utility and a nice onboard combo with Vestige of Soul that you can start the game with. Arcanite Skullcap is going to be sometimes the more important headpiece for you, because you just need the extra pieces of defense, and that's certainly, considering that the rest of your equipment doesn't block so well. You know, Footsteps can block small attacks. You generally don't want to block with your Vestige of Soul because it's Blade Break until the end of the game. Sometimes having the Skullcap can just give you a bit more tankiness if you feel like the combo potential of the Tome of Divinity off the Halo of Illumination is not quite as important. Then we've got a budget build with no legendaries. So this is Halo of Illumination, Heart and Cross Trap, which basically gives you a free Phantasm attack at some point in the game. Dreamweavers, which again, same as the other build, and Ironhide Legs, which is a lot better in Prism than in a lot of other decks. You'll notice that this is Ironhide, not Iron Rot, because you're going to be pitching more often on your opponent's turn to play auras, but also to activate Prism's ability, which is an instant, and to activate your Phantasmal Footsteps. Oh, actually, you won't be playing these, but to activate Prism's ability and to play auras, you'll often have an extra resource floating around to pay for Ironhide Legs. And in that way, it is a proxy for Phantasmal Footsteps, which has that play pattern of you can pitch a blue, you can spend 2 resources to create a Spectral Shield, and you can spend the last remaining floating resource to activate your Ironhide Legs that you would have otherwise spent to activate your Phantasmal Footsteps. So in summary, choose your variant build or your packages of cards that you like to suit the game plan that you want to go with, and optimize your deck around that. You can try and tax action points with auras. You can build up Spectral Shields to threaten free attacks with Go Again. You can play efficient Heralds with Pummel backup to force the issue. And those are kind of the 3 main packages in the Prism strategy. You've got the auras, the shields for the value. So the auras threaten an ongoing onboard presence and incremental advantage. The Spectral Shields threaten free attacks each turn and prevention as well if they manage to hit you back. And efficient Heralds with Pummel allow you to force through damage, but also get a lot of your triggers online. You can utilize Vestige of Soul for big turns with Tome of Divinity, and try and set up that, you know, a Tome in the arsenal, Halo of Illumination, crack it, put something in the soul, play an efficient Tome, and then try and go for a really big turn, or play out lots of auras on a key turn and try and take control of the game from there. So there are lots of different ways to play Prism, lots of different interesting aspects to the play patterns. I encourage you to put together the suggested deck list that I've put with the video in the description. Give it a whirl, play it against some friends, and do test against different decks, and play against it as well. Get used to what are the pressure points, when should you attack the Spectra auras, hint it's most of the time, and how can you overcome Prism's incremental advantages to land some damage and wrest control back. Hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time with the next video in our Hero Spotlight series. Not sure exactly who we're going to do next. Might be time to duck into the Brutes and hit Rhino or Leviathan up, but I have had a couple of requests for Katsu as well, so I might have to go Ninja. We'll see how we go, but hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.